Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm Sami Seif. I'm a composition fellow here. I'm here to talk about how knowledge about time perception influences the music that I write. I'm mainly going to use my string quartet, which is called Orientalism, as an example. So, how time passes by, some thoughts on musical time. Time is a fascinating enigma. Though everything involves it, we often have a hard time defining and understanding it. In these ways, it is much like music in that it is hard to define and elusive to our understanding, despite its omnipresence in our lives, especially in Midtown Manhattan. One of the great powers and mysteries of music is its ability to transcend chronometric time through what I like to call musical time or phenomenological time. The latter refers to time as we experience it. It's a subjective measurement of time, whereas the former is measured with a clock, if a little arbitrary. Admittedly, time is also measured in beats and bars in music. And while it's not often articulated, many listeners are aware, even if only intuitively, that music affects our experience of time. So, what then explains the gulf between chronometric time and musical time? Traditional theories of time tell us about an absolute objective time of Newtonian physics. Our vocabulary with regards to time is usually borrowed from the visual or spatial realms. For example, we speak of a grid of time or a point of time, and this is symptomatic of a lack of specificity in our approach to temporality. Time is not delineated by reaching time points or by crossing grid lines. Rather, it's delineated by perceived phenomena. And what constitutes a phenomenon depends largely, if not entirely, on context. So we're going to listen to two excerpts from my string quartet. I chose these excerpts because the first one is very still and not so directed in its approach to time, whereas the other one relies more on anticipation and building tension. Okay, and this is the next excerpt. All right, so some of the things we can consider here are the essential differences and contextual matters of these two excerpts. And then in the second part, I'll be talking about a specific state of time that I refer to as hypnosis. By the end of the presentation, I will have detailed a little bit more about how these two excerpts operate on fundamentally different approaches to time. So this first section will cover some general principles on the phenomenology of time, and we're going to consult some scientific research to help us get a grasp of things. First, Lorraine G. Allen's research shows that a densely filled interval of time is judged as longer than an empty interval of the same chronometric duration. This is known as the filled duration illusion. It's a cognitive illusion in which a high level of stimulation stretches out one's perception of time to make it feel longer than it would have with fewer stimuli. One of the implications of this finding is that faster music tends to slow down musical time. This reveals the link between density of stimulus and the phenomenology of time. If the presented oral stimulus is sufficiently dense, it can make time feel longer. Furthermore, a study carried out by James Corrales and Robert Kent shows that louder music is perceived as longer than quieter music. So consider how the second excerpt I have builds towards increasingly dense, increasingly dissonant, and increasingly loud music as we approach the end of that passage, thus raising the level's anticipation for what is to come next. Returning to scientific literature, as Robert Mead's research finds, time distorts and feels longer than its clock time as we approach the end of goal-oriented tasks, and no distortion is observed when no goal is present. Anticipation thus elongates musical time. And anticipation is a normal part of human behavior. Our mind constantly wants to make connections to past and future events, which is why we tend to be most focused on and have a better recalling of what we perceive as being articulations of important beginnings and endings. Of course, as always, details matter. For example, Huron cites Woodrow, who states that tones of long duration tend to terminate a rhythmic group. Thus, the specifics of the use of rhythm is a decisive variable with regards to creating anticipation. This is even more the case when a long duration occurs at the start of something. This technique is used quite substantially in my piece, such as at the beginning where we have the long held note that's passed between the instruments. I'm not gonna play the whole excerpt again, but yes, just that long note, that's what it does. There's also the contextual matter of the listener's own experience. One's own way of listening and perceiving plays a substantial impact on how they will hear and perceive the music, and indeed all events. As Bob Snyder explains, long-term memory acts as something like a filter determining which aspects of our environment we are aware of at a given time. Furthermore, Richard Bloch's research shows that awareness of time makes phenomenological time feel longer, confirming the common saying that a watched pot never boils. Once we get into the contextual matters of the listeners, more and more complexities pile on. While this section covered various contextual factors, mainly one centering around anticipation, the next one will go into detail about a specific state of time, which I call hypnosis. One possible outcome of the manipulation of time is what I call hypnosis. While hypnosis for some may sound like some supernatural phenomenon, it is a normal part of human experience. I myself experience hypnosis in various parts of Orientalism, for example, in the first excerpt. For the purpose of this presentation, hypnosis will refer to a changed state of awareness that is characterized by improved focus and concentration. Hypnosis, as defined here, is merely a form of enhanced attention. Noteworthy is the fact that people vary in their susceptibility to experiencing hypnosis, with some being unable to experience it at all. People also vary in terms of which stimuli make them more susceptible to hypnosis. Those who are hypnotizable exhibit higher levels of absorption in a task. For example, they become readily lost in a book or a film or music. Hypnosis has a special impact upon temporal judgment, making its subjects considerably underestimate the passage of chronometric time. As Valteri explains, it is not unusual for participants of hypnosis experiments to suggest as little as half the true duration. Now that hypnosis has been explained, I will consider how it applies to my work as an artist. Now, the fact that the first excerpt starts out with a long held note makes it so that there is a continuity while the note is present. This continuity persists over the strong articulations that occur at irregular intervals, which are hard to predict. While one may argue that the strong articulations disturb the continuity of the held note, they do not break it up. And by definition, musical continuity is necessary to experience hypnosis. And repetition is one factor which can aid in inducing hypnosis through creating continuity. As Elizabeth Margulis explains, repeated exposures trigger an attentional shift from more local to more global levels of musical organization. Repetition thus can be understood to affect the listener's orientation toward the music. The horizon of involvement widens with additional exposures. This is one of the many complexities of discussing phenomenology of perception. It is that the perception of an unchanging object may easily change. This remains the case as the object turns into a noma, that is, a mental object, because every time we revisit a memory, we change it slightly. Conclusion. Although we may not have come to an exhaustive understanding of musical time due to the limits of this presentation, we have derived some insights upon the much neglected aspect of musical temporality. Although chronometric time progresses steadily and inexorably in one direction, what is clear is that musical time is not as straightforward. Music is not the raw data which is written on paper, nor is it the performed sound waves, the compressions and rarefactions of air. Rather, it is in the mind's interaction with this data and sound waves that create the music. It is often assumed that music occurs in time, as if time were some canister that contained events but was never influenced by them. I believe, however, that music is not in time, but time is in music. Thank you.